Great. Well, thanks everybody for joining. We're really excited to share some updates and dig back into what has become a series of webinars that we've done this year regarding American Rescue Plan funds and the ability and opportunity for states and cities to use American Rescue Plan funds to advance paid family and medical leave, paid sick time, and public health emergency leave as a few examples. Before we got started, for those who are joining now, did just want to note we're recording the webinar. We'll also be sharing the recording and slides and materials to everybody who is on after the webinar today. Please feel free to use the Q&A or chat function to send questions. We'll save some time at the end to go through any questions that folks may have. But yeah, to kick things off, really excited to have some colleagues and partners on the call today. And everybody will have a chance to introduce themselves a bit more, but excited to have Megan, Feroza, and Natalie from A Better Balance. And each can just share the work that they do when we move through the presentation. Also really excited to have Morgan Nichols from Main Street Alliance with us today to be able to talk about one of our case studies that we're really excited from Vermont. We'll also be digging into Colorado as two places that have used American Rescue Plan funds for paid leave. So yeah, with that, I am gonna just kick things off with a little bit about A Better Balance for those of you who aren't familiar. And we're a national legal advocacy organization with offices in New York City, which is where Megan's based out of, Tennessee in our southern office, which is where Feroza is joining us from, Colorado, which is where I'm based, and Natalie also works, and Washington, DC. And you can see here our mission, which is to leverage the power of the law to ensure workers can care for themselves and their loved ones without risking their economic security. And you can see here, along with the rest of our mission, some of the issues that we work on. And we'll really be digging in today to the first two, paid sick time and COVID-19 emergency leave, and paid family and medical leave, and how American Rescue Plan funds can be used to advance those policies. And did just want to note, this is a time of year where I'm sure, many of you are also preparing for new state legislative sessions, for more work at the local level as well. And so, we're hearing about a lot of planning for paid leave work in the months ahead, and really do want to lift up, as we'll discuss in more detail today, how American Rescue Plan funds can be used to do that work. And we'll also just note, there's more and more research that is coming out, building on years of research about the public health benefits of paid sick time, public health emergency leave, paid family and medical leave, including all of the lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic and the critical value of COVID-19 sick leave, which are lessons that really we should all heed. And as we see more cases of MPV, or what a lot of folks refer to as monkeypox, really important that we address some of the gaps in our country's laws and think about how states and cities can step in to help fill that gap. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Megan Racklin, to dig in a bit to the American Rescue Plan.
Thanks, Jared. My name is Megan Racklin. I'm a senior staff attorney in A Better Balance's New York office, and I'm just going to provide a little bit of background on the American Rescue Plan's state and local fiscal recovery funds, which is the pot of money that we are talking about today. So the American Rescue Plan provides these state and local fiscal recovery funds to state and local governments to enable them to respond to the COVID-19 public health emergency or its negative economic impacts, and to respond to workers performing essential work during this public health emergency. The two reasons up on the slide right now are two of four reasons that state and local governments can spend these state and local fiscal recovery funds, and they're the ones we're going to focus on today. Jared, can we go to the next slide? The Treasury began dispersing these funds in May 2021, and the second half of the funding was made available in May 2022. States and localities do have to request this funding. So while the funding was made available, it's not automatically dispersed. There's a request process available on the Treasury Department's website. And state and localities have a little bit of runway to decide how they're going to spend this money and to actually spend it. They have until December 31st, 2024 to obligate the funds, or basically to decide how they're going to spend the money, and until December 31st, 2026 to actually spend the money. And I do just want to note here that states and localities have not spent all of this money by any means. It varies a lot by state and locality, and we have some resources that we point towards on our website that can help you figure out how much money your state or locality might still have available. But I do think it's worth noting that there is a lot of this money still available, and it can be used for really exciting paid leave purposes, which brings us to the Treasury Department's final rule on the state and local fiscal recovery funds. The final rule, in a really exciting development, made it really, really clear that the state and local fiscal recovery funds of the American Rescue Plan can be used to create, expand, and financially support paid leave, which is a really exciting opportunity for states and localities to provide workers with the paid leave they need to support themselves and their families and maintain their economic security during now several overlapping health crises, but really to respond to the effects that COVID-19 has had and continues to have on workers and their families and their health. So the Department of the Treasury's final rule says that paid sick, medical, and family leave programs or assistance to expand access to health insurance are one of several ways that states and localities can respond to the negative economic impacts of the public health emergency caused by COVID-19. We go to the next slide. As I said, specifically, the Treasury Department says that state and localities can use these funds to create, expand, and financially support paid leave programs, which is really exciting because that means that there are a number of ways that these funds can be used to expand access to paid leave for workers across the country. We've already seen the funds be used for paid leave purposes in Massachusetts. If you joined our last webinar on this subject, you heard from our friends at Greater Boston Legal Services about how they use the funds in this way. And they've also been used for paid leave purposes in Washington State, Colorado, and Vermont. And you'll hear a little bit more from my colleague Natalie about how these funds have been used in Colorado, and from our partner Morgan at Main Street Alliance in Vermont about how they've been used in Vermont for paid leave purposes. But first, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Feroza to talk a little bit about all of the ways, or some of the ways, I should say, because there's a lot of creative potential here that these funds can be used for paid leave purposes.
Thanks, Megan, and thanks everyone for joining us today. As Jared mentioned, my name is Feroza Freeland. I'm the policy manager of the Southern office here at A Better Balance, and I'm based in our regional Southern office in Nashville, Tennessee. And so I'm just going to share a few different options for how these ARP funds can be used to advance access to paid leave. And for folks who are working in Southern states or, red or purple states, we know that sometimes we do have to get a little bit creative. And I think the good news is there are a lot of different creative and innovative ways to really implement these funds to advance access to paid leave. So the first option we wanted to mention was state and local governments to actually think about either creating or expanding paid leave programs for their own employees. We know this is really important. First, just so that they can serve as model employers for the private sector and sort of set that example. But also because the public sector workforce tends to be disproportionately made up of women and people of color. And so this is one important tool to really advance equity. And we have seen, across the country, including here in the South, more and more state and local governments expanding access to paid leave for their own employees. So that's really exciting. The next option is vaccine leave. And of course, as we've just had a new booster be made available for COVID-19, I think the vaccine leave is going to continue to be really, really critical. And we also know that not being able to get time off of work has created a barrier for many folks in being able to access these really important vaccines. So that's another option for folks to use these funds. Another option for states that are perhaps in the earlier stages of exploring a statewide paid family and medical leave program, these funds can actually be used to conduct a cost study to better understand the different options and what that could look like in your state. It can also be used to help cover startup costs for a new program, which we'll hear more about from my colleague Natalie a little bit later. And then another option here is to create a paid sick time law with reimbursement for employers. And I think this is really sort of one of those creative approaches. And we have seen a few states do this, and we'll be hearing more about that from Morgan shortly. But some states have actually used these funds to reimburse employers for the costs of providing leave to their employees. Another interesting approach is to think about paid leave requirements for government contractors. So for many of us, we may be in states, particularly in the South, where local governments are essentially prohibited or preempted from creating paid leave requirements for private sector businesses. However, in many of those states, they would still have the ability to set some sort of minimum paid leave standards for businesses that are contracting with the city or state government. We have seen, different places implement this approach. And so ARP funds could be used for that as well. And we certainly encourage folks, if that's something you're interested in exploring in your community, please do reach out to us, because there are different considerations, depending on your state's specific laws. The next option, if you are fortunate enough to live in a state that does have an existing paid family and medical leave program, these funds could also be used to support those programs. Most of the programs have remained in very good shape, but in the event that there were some, adjustments or issues that arose during the pandemic, ARP funds could be used to help with that as well. And related to that, again, for those states with existing programs, we know that outreach and education is so important. We have to make sure that workers know about these programs, that they understand their rights under these programs, and how they can access benefits, particularly because some of these programs can be pretty complex and complicated. I think as advocates who have worked on this, y'all know that very well. And so the outreach piece is really important as well. And these funds could go towards that too. Also, another option is expanding existing paid leave programs, and really encouraging folks to think about, how do we ensure that benefits are accessible to workers who may typically be left out of these programs. And then the final option that we wanted to mention is paid leave incentive programs. So essentially creating incentives like a grant program, for example, to encourage private businesses to adopt new paid leave policies. And again, with this approach, there are some different considerations. You want to make sure that there are some really strong guardrails in place. We do encourage folks, again, if you're interested in exploring something like this in your state or your city, do reach out to us. We'd love to talk further about what that could look like.
Hi, everyone.
I'll pass it to Morgan.
Thanks, Rosa. I appreciate it. Hi, everyone. My name is Morgan Nichols, and I'm the New England Regional Manager of Main Street Alliance, and I'm based out of Burlington, Vermont. So Main Street Alliance is an organizing, I'm going to stay on that last slide for a little bit. So Main Street Alliance is we organize small businesses to lift up and fight for policies that are going to level the playing field for our workers, our families, and our communities, because we know that when we have a more equitable society, our small business, and a thriving society, and communities, our small businesses will thrive. So we work on 5 core issue areas around healthcare, tax fairness, anti-monopoly, equitable access to capital, and then obviously in this space, issues associated with the care economy. So paid leave, paid family and medical leave, childcare, and secure retirement. We also lead the Vermont Family and Medical Leave Insurance Coalition. And so we were some of the driving forces behind this legislation here in 2022. So all of this came out in the summer of 2021. We knew that FFCRA was going to end. So we started planting seeds with lawmakers about the possibility of putting something into place that would essentially replace the FFCRA program. We were met with lots of skepticism, unfortunately, and not a lot of commitment, but we kept pushing. In December of 2021, Omicron hit Vermont in a way that we were not prepared for at all. And workers and families were up against the ropes, and businesses didn't have the financial bandwidth to keep everyone whole. So we submitted testimony to Senate Economic Development. We provided framework, often supported by A Better Balance with framework legislation from Massachusetts. But we worked with A Better Balance to submit this testimony, and we just worked with the committee to move this forward. This wasn't a straight line. We didn't get everything that we want, but we did feel strongly that we got something substantive across the finish line, and it's something that we're proud of. Go to the next slide. So this is what we are working with. I'm sorry, I'm looking at 2 different slides here for notes purposes. So this is what we did land with. So the program runs from July 1st, 2022, and it goes from June 30th to 2023. It's a first come, first served application process, and employees will apply quarterly. So we're just actually a few days out from the first time that employers will apply for these last 3 months. And the program will run as long as we have money. We were able to appropriate almost $15.2 million in ARPA funds. And where we landed, and this was kind of a circuitous and winding road, but where we did land at the last minute was 40 hours of COVID paid leave at 100% wage replacement up to $21.25 per hour. I'll share that we started out with 80 hours, and at one point it was that they would get 70% wage replacement. We accepted that because we didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But the way that legislation was written, it actually turned out that the business owner was going to be eligible for, or would have to, in order to receive this, would have to pay the additional 30%. And while our business owners were happy to pay that 30%, we knew that some weren't going to. And so we wanted to make sure that we created as equitable and level a playing field for workers so that they could gain access to this. I'll also share that we fought hard to try to include sole props and employers in this program, because we know that if a massage therapist is out for a week because they're sick, they're not earning. We weren't able to get that across the finish line. And as we move into 2023, this is something that we really care about, and something that I would flag for the rest of you to make sure that you're paying attention to, as well as we especially know that this sector is growing for women and people of color across the country. Eligible use. I will put the list of the enacted bill text in the chat when I'm done, but essentially the uses of this are the same as FFCRA. So you can use it to take care of yourself, to take care of a family member, to cover your leave if a child is out for loss of school or childcare. Vaccine is also included in this as well. So we really kind of just plug and played the FFCRA usage in this. You can go on to the next slide. I'm just going to pop this into the chat. This is the bill text that we landed with. So the way that we did this the way that we were able to get this across the finish line was a number of different tactics. We collected over 100 small business sign-ons and over 500 worker sign-ons. We worked with AFT to really get the labor movement as well. And in our sign-on form, we had the ability to collect stories, and we asked permission if we were able to use those stories, so that when we submitted this testimony, everything was there. We developed a couple different op-eds. We worked with earned media, so we scheduled interviews and had articles written about this. We provided testimony on multiple occasions on this, and also just made sure that we were doing direct outreach and walking the halls with lawmakers. It was very important for us to have a very hands-on approach here in Vermont. Vermont doesn't have staff. Their legislature, they don't have legislative staff. So it's really important that here in Vermont, like, we needed to have a strong presence. And I'll just say that we Elizabeth Warrened the situation. We were very persistent and just made sure that we continued to lift up the importance of this program, and we were able to get it across the finish line. Let me just make sure that I lift up a couple extra pieces. So one thing that's important to note, and I'm going to read this so I get this right, that it includes reimbursement for retroactively provided COVID-19 paid leave to employees who took unpaid leave for COVID-related reasons because they didn't have accrued paid leave to use. Employers cannot seek reimbursement for funds if any paid leave was deducted from the employee's accrued paid leave balance at the time the COVID-19 related leave was taken, unless it was later restored. And this is important to note since it incentivizes COVID leave as a different type of leave. And I'll just lift up that we're hearing from many employers that have been using this as a way to backfill earned time off, so that employees, or reimburse employers that don't have a policy and paid their workers during this time. We have already seen the US Treasury ruling, because a Better Balance just shared all of this. And then I would also just love to reiterate what Feroza and Megan lifted up earlier, was the importance of outreach and education. At this juncture, we don't have guidance from the Department of Financial Regulation, specific guidance as to how employers are going to apply for this. This program started July 1. And so we have been communicating what we do know to people, that people need to be tracking who, what, when, and why, and providing any documentation that they can get. But we have been the main conduit to try to get this out to employers within our network. I would highly recommend that appropriations are earmarked for outreach and education. And I think that is probably where I'll land. I'll pass it on to whoever's next. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions as well.
Great. And just a reminder for folks, please put any questions in the Q&A function or in the chat, and we'll turn to those shortly. But next, we're going to hear from my colleague here in Colorado, Natalie.
Thank you. And hello, everyone. I'm Natalie Petrucci. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a staff attorney at A Better Balance based in our Colorado office here in the Denver metro area. And it's my pleasure to update you all regarding how Colorado has used American Rescue Plan funds to support our state paid family and medical leave program, also called the Family Program. So you might hear me use those terms interchangeably. So just a little bit of background on our law here. After years of working on the ground to pass a strong PFML law at the legislature and encountering significant lobbying opposition, the Colorado Paid Family and Medical Leave Coalition turned to the ballot. And in November of 2020, our ballot initiative, Prop 118, passed by a margin of more than 15 percentage points and won counties from across the state, including counties with very diverse demographics and different political leanings. And with the passage of Prop 118, Colorado became the first state to pass a PFML law at the ballot. And while Colorado's Family and Medical Leave Insurance Act, or the Family Act, is now law, it is not yet in effect. So just some dates to keep in mind. At present, we are soon going to be starting our program in terms of premium collection for both employers and employees. That will begin January 1st of 2023. And on January 1st of 2024, that's when coverage begins for workers, including self-employed individuals who have opted into the program. That's when people will begin to be eligible to receive benefits for qualifying needs. Next slide, please. So now talking a little bit more about our need for startup funding here in Colorado. Soon after our bill or our ballot initiative passed, advocates had little time to celebrate. We really dug into a new phase of coalition work focused on implementing our law. And the Colorado Family Implementation Coalition, including an executive committee made up of 3 organizations, and those are 9 to 5 Colorado, A Better Balance, and the Colorado Fiscal Institute. We have already led the way through several implementation phases and unique challenges. One of these challenges related to funding the startup costs needed to invest in our state PFML program or the family program. Our state division tasked with running the program needed an investment of funds to be able to hire staff, build the program, and create technology in order to receive and process future claims. However, due to Colorado's unique fiscal requirements as a result of a provision in our state constitution known as the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, or TABOR, the state could not use general revenue to cover these costs. And the state had to get very creative. And with the support of the Family Implementation Coalition, we passed a financing bill in the legislature last year to fund this early investment in the program. The bill involves the state making an advanced payment as a covered employer of state employees in the sum of $57 million of its own premium payments. So that's an advanced payment. And that really was the capital needed, the investment needed to get the program started. The state used ARP funds to cover this advance on its premiums. Again, this is a unique but really great example of how ARP funds can be used to advance a state paid leave program. And just a note going forward, once our premium collection begins in Colorado in 2023, our program will be self-sustaining. So this was really a helpful use of this one-time infusion of investment money to help ensure that our program is strong and gets a strong start so that we can launch the program in 2023, and then coverage will begin in 2024. So I will turn it back to my colleagues at A Better Balance. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. We just wanted to flag for everyone that there are additional resources available on our website. We have an American Rescue Plan state and local fiscal recovery funds hub on our website that collects our resources as well as resources from partners, including, as I mentioned before, some tools to help you figure out how much of this money remains unallocated in your particular state or locality, as well as fact sheets on some of the different ways that these funds can be used, including, as my colleague Feroza was discussing earlier, best practices for using these funds to create paid leave policies for local government employees, and a broader overview of a number of the ways that these funds can be used. In response to a question in the Q&A, I wanted to highlight again, as my colleague Feroza mentioned earlier, that we believe these funds can be used for enforcement of paid leave programs, as well as for outreach, education, and the creation of new programs, and many of the other reasons that she mentioned earlier. I definitely want to echo what Morgan said about the importance of trying to earmark some of these funds for outreach and education. If these funds are going to be used for paid leave, it's really important that people know about their rights. And just to add to that, that it is also really crucial that these rights be adequately enforced so that people are really able to take advantage of the incredible new rights and protections that these funds can be used to create. We are here to help if you have questions about how to use these funds or want to brainstorm ideas for other creative ways these funds can be used. As we mentioned earlier, the use of these funds for paid leave purposes is pretty flexible, which is a really exciting opportunity to think outside the box and think about how to get as many workers as possible the paid leave that they need, both as the pandemic continues and in the future. You are free to reach out to me, to Feroza or Natalie, and for more information about the use of these funds in Vermont, please feel free to contact Morgan. All of our contact information is here. And as Jared mentioned, we will be sharing these slides with everyone who registered for the webinar today. So you'll have our emails in your inbox soon, and please feel free to reach out if there's anything you'd like to discuss further.
Thanks, Megan. And yeah, if there's any final questions or chat, I know we answered some as we went along. Please feel free to do that now. Did just want to lift up something that both Morgan and Feroza touched on, which is, as we think about how to use American Rescue Plan funds for programs like reimbursing employers or paid leave incentives, it is really important that we think about program design in ways that really will incentivize new paid leave that really addresses equity and access for the workers who need it most. And this is something that Main Street Alliance was really attuned to in Vermont. And Morgan, mentioned some of those program parameters that really were designed to increase access. So, it's something that A Better Balance is very happy to talk more about. You should feel free to reach out to any of my colleagues here on this slide for support. Happy to provide technical assistance, answer questions, and be a resource for any opportunities. And then I think the last thing I'll mention is, since this is a common question and one that we had here as well, that as Megan mentioned, if there's questions about your city or state and how American Rescue Plan funds may have been used or what's left, there's a lot of different sources of information and it can be pretty tricky to figure out, and we're happy to try to help point you in the right direction. So definitely can reach out and we can share some resources, although we are hearing that localities in particular at the municipal and county level generally have more unused American Rescue Plan funds. So certainly opportunities at the local level, but also a lot of variety at the state level and still opportunities with this second wave of funding. So yeah, if there's any support that A Better Balance can provide, please don't hesitate to reach out. And I think with that, we are gonna wrap the webinar and thank everybody for joining today and for thinking about these opportunities. And thanks to all of today's presenters for sharing information about your work. Really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.